is to make sure that we do the best job on recovery we can, but there's other things that we have to address. And to understand what those things are and how to address them, we really rely heavily on universities and our academic colleagues. So before Sandy, we had this group called the New York City Panel on Climate Change, which the previous Mayor Bloomberg started around 2008. And it's sort of like our local IPCC. They provide local projections for us, targeted to the users of that data. So policymakers like myself, the people who run our utilities, private developers, whoever might need that information. They've been around for a decade. They've put out several reports. It's been incredibly useful, and it's the foundation for an enormous amount of our policy making. And their work continues to grow. We are about to start NPCC4 with some new leadership, some new groups, and we're actually accepting nominations now for new people to join the NPCC and help provide New Yorkers with the best climate projections available. We did other work ahead of Sandy as well. Climate assessments, similar to the work being done in Indiana right now, just trying to get our heads around what the problem is, what we can do about it. So going forward, we are doing a lot thinking about Sandy. We're doing a lot trying to respond to that, but we're also thinking about our other hazards. And in the Office of Resiliency, we're going to be doing our job best when we are being proactive and we are getting ahead of disasters before they happen. So we're looking very carefully at the best available climate data we have, which tells us that heat is going up. That tells us that extreme rainfall is going to happen more frequently and with more intensity, and that it's going to hit parts of our city that are not ready for it. We're also really worried about heat, and heat is a huge issue in New York City already, and it has a hugely disproportionate impact on New Yorkers, particularly our lower income neighborhoods, people of color, historically disadvantaged communities are already with less air conditioning in their communities. They have less green space to cool down the neighborhoods. It's a problem today. It's a problem that's going to get worse. So we're trying to address that now. And for all of these things, we really heavily rely on our academic partners. And so I'm excited to have more of a conversation about that now, thinking through the ways we can work better with universities, and look forward to that conversation. So I'll leave it there. Thank you. Santos Rodriguez.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being here today. Pete, we'll build it. Let's go for it. You know, we're looking to partner up also. So we'll talk real quick. I don't have any slides either, but I did jot some notes down. You know, Peter speaks about Sandy Build It Back, and we were on the forefront of that. I myself helped out and volunteered with an organization called Hard 9/11, and we brought in people from the trades with that experience to gut out homes, right? And what we did with the city of New York was monumental. We built those homes where people wanted to stay 100% with union labor, giving access and giving people an opportunity to come into the unionized construction industry, either working in their neighborhoods or across New York City, right? So being a gateway and a pathway to rebuild that community, also with having those people from those communities, when you give people opportunity, they'll stay there. They'll spend their money there. Giving that access is crucial to helping people in those depressed neighborhoods, places where I come out of. Without the trade, I wouldn't be here today. No shot in hell, excuse the expression. But that's the truth. I've been given an opportunity to work with New York Stands with Puerto Rico. I was the point person helping Governor Cuomo's initiative, New York Stands with Puerto Rico. We deployed close to 300 volunteers. Now that's great. These members stayed for weeks at a clip, left their jobs. In construction, you have to understand, there's no guarantee that when we come back, we're going to work. So they took their time to help not businesses in Puerto Rico, but families in Puerto Rico rebuilding roofs. The things that we take for granted today, a simple roof, shelter, stopping water from coming in, those blue tarps, we did over 250, 275 homes. That's 250, 275 families, kids. We built a gentleman's home. True, to the point where resources were limited from resources from the neighborhood. Someone's roof that collapsed, we can use the wood, the metals, even the wiring that was left around to rebuild. This man had, sorry, because it's personal to me, right? Was living with one wall up, a tarp and his sofa. We built him his home. To our standards here in New York or the United States, a shed. When we walked in to visit him after the home was up, in Puerto Rico, if you've never been, you go into someone's house, they offer you something, the little that they have, you take. They're not asking if you want something to drink. They're offering you a juice, they're giving you a juice, or they're giving you un cafecito, right? Take it. But this man, we built him his palace, 80-something years old. That's all he had. FEMA would not help because there's no deed to the land. You see that being an issue in Puerto Rico. You might see that being an issue in the Bahamas. I'm not sure. But if my grandfather owned acreage and had 15 kids, when my mother's one of 12, and split that property up, there's no deed. That happens way too often. There's no track of that, right? That's how Puerto Rico was built. It's probably still happening today. But how do we tie in community and how do we, plan for the future? So understand what happened in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was in a dire state before Hurricane Irma and Maria came. The financial crisis in Puerto Rico, we can stay here and spend days talking about that. There's plenty of fingers to point. There's plenty of blame to go around. We didn't get there on our own, right? But the people of Puerto Rico are resilient. My parents, my mother's from Manatí, so I was over there not so long ago. My father's from Guanica and Ensenada. Two areas that were hit pretty hard. We worked in Playita. If you guys remember the news, the homes were underwater. You saw SOS written on the roofs. Now for us to come into someone's neighborhood, you have to respect the community. You have to speak to community leaders, and in some areas, much like in Playita, we had to speak to those other people that folks are not willing to speak to different temperature, reading between the lines. We gained access to the community because we spoke to community leaders and we spoke to other community folks that, in all honesty, ran the neighborhoods. Gave us access. We had a house that was donated to us with thousands of dollars worth of tools and material. No one touched it. To this day, I was over there 2 years later. We worked in Orocovis and Morovis, mountaintops, el corazón de Puerto Rico, the heart of Puerto Rico, right? Is what it's known as. We had to work in areas where the embankment was 100 feet deep. That's the fall. But the takeaway that our members felt, the community felt great. Our members would do it all over again for people. What needs to happen is the training to help rebuild by the people of any area that's been struck by disaster. I'll go back to Sandy Build It Back. We helped train over 100 people to come into the unionized industry to rebuild their homes and work in the unionized construction industry in New York City to help better themselves and better their families, right? To get that gateway, to get that opportunity, like I was presented, like many, countless of us have been presented with. A simple opportunity can change anyone's life. So the training aspect is important. Puerto Rico, we have big business coming with a workforce. Get paid top dollar, above minimum wage, and the workforce leaves. with the money, we were able to talk to an organization that works with veterans, and we didn't want to partner up with them because what they were doing was incredible. They were building and hiring people from Puerto Rico and paying them above minimum wage so that they can rebuild, whereas we were just bringing in volunteers. But the access points, I can't stress that enough, is creating that opportunity, leaving the neighborhoods, coming into someone's neighborhood, and teaching someone how to fish, not feed them. Just teach them how to fish. They will continue to flourish on their own. We are resilient people. We will continue to move this forward. So I appreciate the time. I don't want to take too much of it. I hope I didn't extend it. But thank you very much for this opportunity. This means the world to me. And thank you guys.
Mayor Neary. So the first question comes to mind is, who's Mayor Neary, right? So I come from a very small community.
I know.
Yes, Pete, you do. Let me just tell you this, that Pete experienced a flood. So I know all the good people from Puerto Rico here and other communities have been hit. Pete lived through that. But yet, he was still out on the front line, working with us, trying to build that community when he had his own problems at home. So I was there, and I appreciate that, Pete. We've had a good friendship over the years. My background is this. Yes, I'm mayor of a little tiny community out in Schoharie County, but I'm here representing the New York State Conference of Mayors. They're having a legislative conference right now, and I'm a couple of their committee. But when you hear my background, you're going to understand why. I spent 40 years of my career, and still do it, in emergency management. So I go back to the days when it first started, when Carter first put FEMA together. So I worked for the state of New York. I had a couple positions, chief of training, education, and exercising. And then when I retired, I was chief operations. I worked in almost every community in New York State. Because I'm from New York City, I worked in New York City for a lot of disasters. They always talk about the big ones, the plane crashes and the Trade Center twice. I did the garbage strike, transit strikes, you know. But I've been down there for that. And so that's kind of my background. And right now, I go all over the United States. Today, I'm leaving for Maine, and I'm actually teaching a course called Community Recovery course. And I'm doing it for a Native American tribe up in Pascal Island, which is almost by Nova Scotia. But it's important. What we're trying to do is educate policymakers that it's not enough to have a great response system. In the United States, we have the best response system in the world. We can bring resources together. And I've heard the frustration at the conference so far, and Santos can tell you. But if we're not organized, it's just a group of resources that we can't help people with. So one of the things we talk about as policymakers is that we need to sit down and talk about how we're going to work in time of emergency and build those relationships. And I'm glad the colleges are on board. But the colleges have always been on board in my career. University of Florida, Colorado, Minnesota, Delaware. They've all done studies for us on various aspects of what we do in time of disaster. So they've been helpful to us. And we've reached out to them to come work with us. And maybe that relationship has separated over the years. I think one of the focuses that frustrates the mayors is there was an awful lot of emphasis put on homeland security. When we know the biggest threats to our community, especially in New York, is flooding. So therefore, we're looking at ways to better respond. So I'll take in a couple places here. All emergencies are local in nature. So we build national systems to respond. And what we really need to do is take a look at local capabilities. And climate change is another one of those things that are not going to go away. The challenges are there. It's what do we need to do to manage them better. So yes, we can train our responders to be better, and we'll buy some more equipment. But one of the things that I try to promote, and I've been to, like I said, I've been to almost every state in this country, working on earthquakes in the Northwest, to people from the fires in California, to tornadoes, to earthquakes. All those things we've worked with, even to, we did a program for the city of Las Vegas, unfortunately, just before they had their shooting. All of these have impacts. One of the things we tried to talk about is, though, is preparing your community to recover. So I've read some stories about Paradise, okay? And they lost a lot of people, and it's really a tragic event, but there's a push sometimes when you're a policy-making position. Let's rebuild. We got to rebuild now. We got to do this now. And you know, we're going to build and to the new normal. Whatever that word means, it doesn't mean much to me. What we need to do, and maybe we can work with universities on this, we need to talk about resiliency. And when we do that build back, let's use the technology that we have to build back correctly, so we're more resilient to the next emergency. We are seeing in the United States, and I have an article with me from it was on CNN, but it was about people retreating. So now we have people retreating from areas that are no longer going back. Look at the Bahamas. Do you think they'll ever be the same? That the families will move back? Over time. Paradise. There's a pressure now to build houses again. If you read the history, and I'm doing some, Monday morning quarterbacking here, we call it the OEFP, Office of Emergency Finger Pointing. But really, what we need to do is take a look. When you read about the development of communities, houses that don't respect where they're being built, the pressure on nature, ecosystem. One of the things that it was a pleasure to read about is Gainesville, Florida, where they're doing this economic ecosystem, where there's pressure to build and build on the coast. Everybody wants to be on the coast. That's great, but it's not so great. So you have to start to think about what makes sense. Rising sea levels, ecosystems, wetlands. Everybody talks about the heat. We've got plans for that. We do emergency plans in New York City for cooling centers and warming centers, and we do it in upstate, and I'd probably do it in Indiana. I work there too. But what we need to do is really take a look at what do we do to recover from emergency, how do we make our communities more resilient, because people are going to live in our communities as mayor, because we're providing them quality services, and it's a safe place to live. So those are the things that we really need to think about. So some of the things that I've heard here today, and I try to be brief, but Pete will tell you I can go on for forever. But so what are the challenges that we're using right now? The federal government has an institution called the National Emergency Management Institute. It's with a home of the Fire Academy, and it's home of the Emergency Management Institute. It's the National Emergency Training Center in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And working to bring people in from all over the United States to talk about the latest technology. A lot of it, unfortunately, is focus on response. And what we really need to do is focus on recovery. So when we get that pressure, we got to take a look at a couple things. Most communities develop a comprehensive community plan. And so in that plan, they talk about how wonderful we want to rebuild our community. But yet to see is something in there about emergency preparedness, or about the impact on environment. Or what are we going to do? Everybody loves the water. Everybody wants to build near that because it's a great attraction. What are the risks? What are the risks? Even in Paradise right now, are there certain technologies we can use in building back? Even in Puerto Rico, are there technologies that we can use in the building industry to say this is a better way to build that building and make it resistant? You're not going to make it flood-proof, but maybe it could sustain the types of threats that we see. And those are the challenges. The problem is that costs a lot of money. So when I used to work for a guy named James Lee Witt, he was the cabinet level position, and it was the first time a FEMA director was raised to cabinet level position, and that was under Clinton. And he had a project called Project Impact. It was great. It was about how to build communities more resilient. And he was the first one that proposed to the federal legislation, the Stafford Act, mitigation grants. Pre-disaster mitigation grants and post-disaster mitigation grants. So here's the idea. Pre is, I have a threat in my community. What can I do? Can I apply for these grant funds to make my community safer and not build levees? We could have an argument all day up here about levees. Okay. But the other part of it was, after the disaster occurs, then we'll give you money to help strengthen it so that we won't have that repetitive loss. I just did it in my community. It started out as a $770,000, $75,000 project for a culvert. It ended up $1.2 million because we built in that prevention mitigation. So if we have a flood, the impact isn't as great. So I think that those are the programs that we need to look at. I heard another thing on the campus here about how students can be involved. And so here's one way. So we have a program all over the United States called CERT. It was started years ago in California following the Loma Prieta earthquakes because they had the same thing, that communities that had no leadership and they were isolated, and this is actually the plan that's taking place in the Northwest for earthquakes. Okay? It's about building and training people to do the basic things, first aid, take care of people. And so why not do it on campuses? We'd love to have your resource, but when you push them on top of us, and as Santos pointed out, have very little training, it becomes difficult. So I'll stop there because I could go on forever. But you know, it's been a challenge. I still continue to work on emergency management. I think it's important, and I welcome this conference for doing this. And you know, I'll give you my full commitment because I believe in it. So on behalf of the mayors of New York State, I appreciate the opportunity to talk.
So I think in the interest of making sure that we have as much of an open discussion as we can at this point, I'm actually going to start by inviting people from the audience to come up. We have a microphone up front. We are recording, so we prefer that people use the microphone. I'll have to turn it on so that we can capture the questions as part of it.
Great presentation. In fact, the best presentation so far. The place that I want to begin, I guess, is with Peter and Pete, and the story that I want to tell is what I did by opening my big mouth and big meeting with Governor Cuomo standing up front, and I said to him, boy, Sandy was really a dope slap for New York State. Now, I had a little bit of inside information because I knew his father and I knew he knew what a dope slap was, but he went with it. And the point of the discussion was that we can learn from these faux pas mistakes that we've made in the past. New York City had 200 shelters for people that could get out of the storm. None of those shelters had a generator. It's just foolish. And the message that I'm trying to bring forward is what my good friend Kevin and even Pete alluded to, that in this process of doing something about a situation, we need to consider the fundamental issue, which is build back better. Build back better is a term that they're actually using in Puerto Rico, and it's a process that we really should use to be open and transparent in moving this process forward. And the way that I and Priya Case, who if you come to this room at 2 o'clock will hear about, is to promote renewable energy as part of that solution. And the way that it was done successfully in New York State was she pioneered a thing called the NY Solar Map. And the NY Solar Map happens to list all of the shelters and all the critical infrastructure and a 3D map of all the buildings. And it is an open process tool that you can use to evaluate these things. We also put a placeholder in place called the PR Solar Map, so we'd love to see that process occur in Puerto Rico. But the transparency, the involvement of the community, that's the key issue, and we need to be fair and we need to do it better.
Agreed.
You wanted to respond to that?
Sure, yes, please.
So I would just say to you, and again, we are substantively on the ground. So we have Carmen, again, I'll have Carmen stand. Carmen represents our Caribbean division. Arriba, por favor. So, and Carmen represents embedded staff in both US VI and Puerto Rico. We are engaged on a daily basis with recovery. And back to the mayor's point and Santos' point, is our goal is empowerment. And our goal is substantive engagement. So back to the energy equation, and this is part of the challenge. We have regular conversations with PREPA, which is the authority that provides power on the island. Their goal is to switch off of oil, which was a problem for them. They're looking in the short term to transition primarily to natural gas, but they would like to have 40% renewables. I forget exactly what date, but that was,
Eventually,
They want
by
fully.
2050, 100%.
they want 100%. So a stepwise progression.
2025.
So part of the challenge is we are working with them, again, nationally, the Department of Energy and our other colleagues, to try and help them understand where sites could be located. We have brownfield sites throughout the island, which we've made known to PREPA. We're also part of trying to understand what their financial needs, and to be honest, the executive director has made it clear that continued federal support is important to help them move forward. So we're engaging and communicating that piece. Back to the non-PRASA, as we work to develop an MOU with Water Mission and other agencies, installing solar panels, energy battery backup systems, and trying to integrate sustainability and resiliency into the rebuild. So we welcome more input from you and more guidance.
I'm gonna give it to you.
And I know you will, We look forward to it.
Just to quickly add on to that, I think one of the many things we learned after Sandy was that our emergency shelters were not up to snuff, and so that has been an area of focus. And again, going back to what I was saying before, we're trying to make sure that we're not just directly responding to the Sandy type of event, but we are making choices and investments that are going to be putting us in a better place to deal with that type of events, but also other types. So for example, we're improving our cooling centers to have not only generators and backup fuel on site, but also make sure those generators are elevated so that if a flood does come, the generator won't be damaged. We're also trying to make sure that those sites are going to serve New Yorkers as cooling centers as well during an extreme heat wave, especially for those folks who might lose power or in many cases just don't have a place to begin with and need a place to go. And so making sure that the cooling centers are well located, that they have water and other things on site that we need to provide folks if they have to be there for a while. So we're trying to learn from that, and a lot of progress has been made. Just quickly too about the opportunity to build back better. It's something which we have been taking on as a serious charge, and so we're beginning with city capital projects. We are now implementing our climate resiliency design guidelines on all types of city projects, with this driving notion being that when the city spends capital dollars, we are spending the public's money on public facilities to provide public services. And we have a real responsibility to do that well and prudently. And we think that incorporating future sea level rise and extreme rainfall and extreme heat and the other hazards we know from our academic partners are going to affect New York City, by tweaking our designs to accommodate those loads, as engineers would call them, these increasing loads, we can create buildings that are going to perform better, last longer, require less maintenance. And so we're trying to do that on all types of capital projects, including the ones that we're rebuilding and repairing after Sandy.
So one last note too, we do, and we're happy to be on the collaborative, working with the city of New York and our state and partners in New York and New Jersey, back to Puerto Rico. The other piece that we're also trying to get back to Janet's point, and we understand rural. Kevin and I serve Northern Appalachia, and my whole career was involved with capacity building development. So part of the energy equation is also looking at flexibility and redundancy within the system. So we are, through EPA, we are supporting initiatives with Department of Energy, NREL, in Culebra and Vieques, looking at microgrid. We just toured in Cialis, a small community system of 27 households together that have a sustainable energy system, and we're looking to repeat that as much as practicable. So that's also part of our engagement. And we welcome more partners.
Yeah, I just want to add something really quick also. In this conversation, please let's not forget that there's still a trained workforce that's needed that creates more opportunity for everything that we're speaking here on the panel.
Yes, and to Santos' point, that the Boricuas in my blood as well. My father's a subsistence farmer from Puerto Rico, Camuy. I lost him a couple of years ago. Kevin knows my father died from cancer. I just wish he was here to see this engagement. He would be very proud of everyone's efforts.
That he would.
Yeah.
Sir.
Hi. My name is Curtis Messer, and I'm the University Director of Workforce Programs at the City University of New York, and I oversee the CUNY Service Corps, which was started after Hurricane Sandy, which we have done well over 1 million hours of service. We continue to have a cohort of about 600 students going up to New York City to support service activities, and we're close to the Service Corps Puerto Rico.
Absolutely.
Our 9/11, we're up there on our Kobe's with our students and other places. Amazing programs that get to, we pay our students to perform service activities, resiliency activities. So my question is, how is there a sustainable funding for this? Right now, both those programs have been funded by the City University of New York. And we've seen that happen. Obviously, we're lucky, I think, to even still be in effect. CUNY Service Corps trying to sustain that, though the budget is well over half of what it was the first year after. And Service Corps Puerto Rico, we hope to be able to go back, but we need to know where we'll be able to sustain that funding. So, where can we tap into local, federal, union and labor dollars to be able to sustain service learning programs where we can expose students to these really important activities that can help the community?
So I don't have any magic bullet for that one, but I can say this, that when I was with the State Emergency Management Office, we had a lot of internships with the state university systems that we paid students to serve with us. And it's really nice. I just ran into one of my former interns in Florida, who's now the emergency management director for a large county down there. But I think that that's some of the creative approaches that we can work as partners of building this relationship of, hey, is there a way, and Pete would know this better than I would, but to approach government leaders to say, is there a way to sustain that funding by using public-private partnerships in time of emergency? Let me just say this, in upstate New York, we look for volunteers. I'm a volunteer firefighter. So not only do I be mayor, they don't have enough people in the town. Sometimes it's better I'm a volunteer fire department, or sometimes they tell you to go back to being mayor. But anyway, but what we're finding right now? That we do not have enough volunteers to sustain our fire departments. We don't have enough volunteers to sustain EMS. Now I've worked in the Virgin Islands with Vitima and in Puerto Rico in emergency management, and they had the same challenges down there about having enough skilled workers to do just the response stuff, let alone build back. So I think that we need to get a strategy that we can build we can build this system better. I don't have any magical bullets.
Yeah, I do, just to respond to that. So, two things. First, as we work, we're working to surface ideas and shortfalls both at the R's flag, which is the cabinet level or sub-cabinet level, but also we're working to develop a collaborative similar to Sandy. So we're working to develop a Caribbean collaborative that will bring stakeholders together. And one concept that we're exploring, and this gets back, so we're happy to surface that need, if you can share that with us more